So, first of all, thank you for coming here and being willing to listen to my message, and thank you for Dad for the opportunity to do so. Let's get right into it. I'm going to focus my sermon based off of Genesis chapter 32, verse 22, and this is the story of Jacob, which we all know relatively well. So, it reads, "That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maidservants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, 'Let me go, for it is daybreak.' But Jacob replied, 'I will not let you go unless you bless me.' The man asked him, 'What is your name?' 'Jacob,' he answered. Then the man said, 'Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome.' Jacob said, 'Please tell me your name.' But he replied, 'Why do you ask me my name?' Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, 'It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared.' The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon." Let's pray. Jesus, we give thanks to you. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to come together before you and to praise your name. I pray that as we study the word, that you teach us something new and a new way to apply it in our lives, Lord. I pray that you be with me, and I pray that my thoughts are one with yours, and you speak through my mouth as well, and that you get glory into this place, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
All right. So it's a little late, but Happy New Year. We're entering not only a new year of 2020, but a new decade. We have closed the 2010s and we're entering the 2020s, and so it's a huge opportunity for us to start fresh and start new. And so that's the point of my sermon. The theme is how to start a decade right. And so many of us have made New Year's resolutions. That's usually what a lot of us do when the new year begins. So whether it's to eat healthier, some of us want to lose weight. Some of us have resolutions to act differently, to be nicer, have patience, not be so angry, whatever it may be, to have more impactful relationships, to study better. We all have different priorities and different resolutions that we've decided to make this year. And so, I know one for myself, my resolution, it actually started a little before the new year, but my resolution was to go to the gym committedly, actually, consistently. And it's been tough, but I've been able to do it. I've been pretty good this year, and I'm keeping it going. And so I wanted to carry on, not just through this year, but through just the rest of my life. It instigated because I stopped growing this way, and I'm growing in other ways now, so it has to be done. And so I understand that in order to see the change in my life, it will take a pivotal shift in my lifestyle in order to create a lasting change. And so right now I'm going to tell you how to win in this decade. How to start this decade rolling and win. And so it's clear from this passage and from Jacob's life that he has a resolution his whole life to win. Right? It's clear from the very beginning. And so we're all familiar with the story, so I'll just set the tone for how we see Jacob's life carried out, and that what got him to this moment where he's found wrestling with God. So, straight out the womb, we know that his mother and father, Isaac and Rebekah, they have twins, and as Esau was born first, Jacob is grasping at his heel. And that sets the tone for Jacob's entire life, constantly reaching for what he wants in life. And so, one of the early stories of when they're older, Esau's out hunting, and he's famished, and he comes back, and Jacob's making soup, so Esau asks, "Give me some soup, brother." And Jacob, knowing what he wants, he says, "I'll trade you this soup for your birthright." And the birthright is what is for the eldest in the family, and they get to carry on that legacy. And so Esau is so famished that he says, "What good is this birthright if I am dead?" And he just trades it away for a bowl of soup. And so Jacob now has obtained this. And we see it again later. He fools his brother twice, where now he hears that, Rebekah hears that Isaac plans on giving, not only, he wants to give the blessing to Esau. And what the blessing is it promises prosperity from generation to generation in the families. So this was started with Abraham, and so Isaac was going to pass it down to Esau. And so Rebekah hears this, tells Jacob, and as Esau is away, they plot to trick him, and Jacob fools his father into giving the blessing to Jacob, and it is irreversible. And so when Esau hears about this, he's furious and he's angry, and Jacob has received this blessing, but at what cost? Because Rebekah comes to him and says, "Your brother knows what you've done. He's going to kill you. You should leave." So he has to flee. Now he goes to his uncle Laban's house, and on the way, he sees a girl who we know is Rachel, and when he sees her, he is enthralled, and he must have her. And so we see that it even goes beyond just love, because he doesn't even know her, but he idolizes her in just her appearance and what her looks are. And so that's honestly a whole other sermon, but he's very he must have her. So he works with Laban. He makes a deal to work 14 years for her, and even then he gets her, even with all the trickery involved between Laban and Jacob, which are known as the interactions between the two deceivers. But still, Jacob comes out on top, and he continues to win. And even when Laban tricks him by giving him, after 7 years, Leah, the eldest daughter, he works 7 more, and he gets Rachel. So his whole life up until this point is still, he gets what he wants in the end. And so again, now, at the end of this, he knows that he wants to return home and start his life. And so it's been 20 years since he left home. He sends a letter home and Esau is like, it's been 20 years. I'm sorry for what I've done. I hope you forgive me. Like, I'm going to come back home. And Esau instead says, "Yeah, you can come back home, and I'll greet you with 400 of my men." Basically saying, "I'm going to kill you." And so he's fearful now. And Jacob, when he's awaiting this interaction where he knows he has to meet Esau, he knows that time is coming. And in nighttime, he ends up splitting his family to hide them in 2 different locations. So he splits them, and this action is actually seen as even greed and even an opportunity to still come out on top, because the thought is when Esau comes and greets him, and if Esau comes and if he ends up killing his family, he'll find one family, kill them, and Jacob will still be able to live the rest of his life with another, and he'll still be able to have his family, and continue his legacy that way. And then it's here that we see at that night when he's waiting for Esau, when Jacob's alone, that God comes to Jacob in the form of a man, and they end up wrestling till daybreak. And this is known as one of the most interesting, I'll say, interactions in the Bible. And this here is also the first time where we see Jacob experience loss. He's unable to overcome this man with God in the form of this man. So, the first thing that we need to know, and what we need to learn from this lesson and the story of Jacob here, is in order to win in life, the first thing we must do is we must be prepared to lose. We have to prepare to lose in life. Loss is inevitable. So many of us make these resolutions of the job we're going to get, how our marriage is going to be revolutionized this year, how we're going to make incredible change this year. But what happens when you lose? What happens if you apply for the job, you have the application, you have the networking, you have everything on your plate that sets you up to win, and this is going to be your year, you're going to get it, but you get the word back from the interviewer, and they don't want you. What do you do in this situation? What do you do when instead of your marriage, you want to fix your marriage, you're going to grow closer? What if instead of that, what if it gets harder? What if you drift further apart? What if you have some unforeseen illness in your life, and it just becomes a blessing to be able to get out of bed, to be able to walk is even a struggle. What if you lose? So, essentially this year we must be ready for loss, disappointment, and failure. Even in the Bible, Jesus promises us trials, sacrifice, and suffering. These are three things as Christians that we are to expect. And many of us as Christians do everything in our power to pray to God to save us from these things. Please, I don't want to suffer. I don't want to have to sacrifice anything. But it is inherent as true Christians who are being effective in faith to experience all of these things. It is seen in Matthew 5:10. This verse says it nicely, where it says, Blessed are those who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. And so we know that when we are persecuted, when we experience loss, that is an indication that we are doing something right. Jacob was a winner. He's been a winner his whole life. And for the first time, he experiences loss when he wrestles God in the form of a man. And this is when, it's in these times where the devil provides us with opportunities to want to quit. It's easy for us when we lose to quit and call it like, oh, I tried, I didn't get it done, on to the next thing. But just because we lose the battle, it does not mean that we lose the blessing of God. We have to remember that God is consistent and God is still standing and He's still sitting on the throne no matter what we experience in life. No matter what is happening in our lives, God is consistent. And even though we may lose the resource, we still have the source. So even if we lose the resources at our disposal, even if we lose the opportunities, God is He's still behind us. He's still got our back. And so we are to remain in the confidence that God is with us always. He is consistent and He is true. So another thing that we can see from this interaction that's very evident in how Jacob has lived his life constantly is that we must beware the dangers of ambition. So, ambition is an interesting topic in Christianity because some people see it as it's not good to have ambitions, really. Like, we should be serving God. Ambition isn't inherently a sin. It's not a bad thing. It's okay to have ambition so long as you keep it focused on God rather than on yourself. And I want to also say that with your ambitions that just because you set your mind to do something, just because you have ambitions for something and you set your mind to do something, doesn't mean that you can do it. So, for example, if I set my mind to joining the NBA, and at this point in my life, if I really want to do it and I set my mind to do it, at this point where I am, I promise you the closest I'm getting to the NBA is the Staples Center. And I'm just sitting there watching the game. There's no way at this point that I'm going to be at the caliber of the NBA players. In the same way, similarly, just because you can do something doesn't mean that you're called to do it. So just because you have the opportunity to, let's say, get that promotion, you have everything lined up, you can do it, or you have enough funds to start that business and you can do it, everything's lined up, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's where God wants to take you in life. It may not be a God-centered ambition that God is telling you that that's where you should be taking your life, the direction you should be headed. So we have to be careful when we are choosing what we are driving. When we're choosing what's driving us, we can't focus on what the ambition is and what we want, but what is the reason for why we're doing it? What is our focus? What is driving us? We can't make it all about ourselves. So we have to be very careful to check our motives. What is motivating you in your ambitions? Why are you pursuing what your ambitions are leading you to do? And so, are you pursuing that new job that you really want, that you've been craving, that you have your resolution for? Do you want it so that you can have the money, you can buy the bigger house, you can have all the expensive things that you want, or even inexpensive things? Is that why you're doing it? Is it for worldly pleasures, or do you want that promotion because you know you'll be able to carry out God's purpose for you on this earth through it? So it's very easy to be caught up and do things for our own ambitions. Also, again, it's clear that ambition isn't necessarily bad. Let me make that clear. And that's evident in Paul's life. So we know how Paul at first, his whole life was always ambitious. From the beginning to the end, he was an ambitious man. Just at the beginning, before finding Christ, he used his ambitions to persecute the church. After he found Christ, still ambitious, equally ambitious, God just changed the course of his life and what his ambitions were, and he decided to use those ambitions to serve Christ and to serve the church instead. So we can see the power of godly ambition and the legacy it can leave. So again, we find Jacob at the end of this chapter wrestling with God. And he did not want to win for God. Jacob wanted to win. It's all he's known in life. He just wants to win. He wrestled with him till daybreak. And God did not start this fight. Jacob starts this fight. God doesn't come to wrestle Jacob. That's not how it happens. And why I say Jacob didn't want God is because it's clear you don't want God when he appears to you, in this case in the form of man. When he appears to you, your first instinct is to wrestle him. You start a wrestling match with God, and you wrestle until you literally cannot anymore. So all his life he's won, and that's what he wants to do here. He wants to win against God and get what he wants out of it. So I ask us, when we encounter God, when God speaks to us, it may not be in such a dramatic fashion, but when we see God, how are we reacting when God's speaking to us? Whether it's through a dream or through other people in our lives, or just in other methods where we know God is speaking to us, what is our reaction? Do we just wrestle with it? Do we resist it? Are we saying like, no, God, that goes against what I want to do, therefore I'm going to wrestle with you until you submit to me? Is that our reaction? So do we want to win for God, or do we want to win for ourselves? Do I want to win for Shawn? Is that what I'm doing instead? We had to check our motives with that. Many of us here in this church and this congregation are strong Christians already, and I'm blessed to be in your presence and even to be able to speak, so I'm very thankful for that. And even within the Christian community, it is very possible to even use God as a tool, as an excuse to win. And so we can use God as a means to an end rather than an end. We can use him as an excuse to get the deal we want. A good example is we can inflate our standing of holiness to impress others. We can use God and come off that way to impress our spouse, to show that we inflate how our faith actually is in our core. We use God for our convenience rather than solely to worship him. And that is a danger in the world. So we see Jacob wrestling God, and when you're wrestling someone, it's a different posture, right? If you're wrestling, you're grappling, Your wrestling is about defending something. When you're wrestling, you're defending yourself. Jacob is in a defensive stance. And we see later, after he cannot overcome and his hip is now displaced, and he knows he cannot overcome God in the form of a man. And God asks him, "Are you done fighting me? It's daybreak now." We see Jacob's posture shift from wrestling to surrendering. And he surrenders in God's arms and begs God to bless him. "I will not let you go until you bless me." And so Jacob realizes that he can't overcome. He stops wrestling and he surrenders to his will. And it's notable that Jacob is not quitting. This is not quitting. He holds on and he's clinging to God for his life. And he begs him for the blessing. And he knows that the only way out of this situation is through it. He knows that the only way out of the situation is through God. It's through God's mercy and through God's grace. That is the only way in which he can overcome this situation. So Jacob switches his posture, and this exemplifies his passionate pursuit for God's presence. You must passionately pursue God's presence in all that you do. And that comes with the understanding that if I got what I wanted, if Jacob got what he wanted, then that comes by sacrificing God's presence in his life. If I got what I wanted in life, if I fight for what I want, and if I get it, and it's my ambitions and my goal, then I'm sacrificing God's presence in my life by obtaining it. So God, when this happened, God asked Jacob, God reacts to Jacob and sees this shift in posture, and he asks Jacob, "What is your name?" And this is Jacob's opportunity to be honest with God. And he says, "I'm Jacob. My name is Jacob. I'm a liar. I'm a deceiver." When God calls our names, it's an opportunity for us to be honest with him in where we are and who we are as a person. My name is Shawn. All right? I'm a liar. I'm a hypocrite. I'm a cheater. Whatever it is. It's when God calls our name, we get to be honest with who we are as a person to God. We cannot make a goal to change without first admitting where we're at up until that point. We can't just walk into our lives and say honey, don't worry, it's all good. I'm going to change. Trust me, I found Jesus. It's happening. There's no weight in that. Until you own up to how you've been, until you're able to say, until you're able to beg for forgiveness, say, "I wasn't the best husband, I wasn't the best father that I should have been up until this point, and I'm sorry, and you should know that I'm going to change my ways from this moving forward, and I want you to hold me accountable for it. Until you're able to take that ownership and beg for forgiveness with the promise of change, there is no weight in the words. So we must do that. So we have to focus on the godly ways of being, how we choose to be as a Christian. And so when we're focusing on how we're being and the attributes of Christianity that we want to exemplify, then the actions follow naturally, the godly actions. That just happens as a byproduct. And only then, when we're being how God sees us and when we're doing what God wants us to do, only then can we have the kingdom of heaven. So God calls our name, and it's an opportunity for us to be honest with Him. And in turn, it opens up a way for God to be honest with us. So when God is speaking to us, He tells us our true name. Jacob gets a new name, Israel, because he wrestled with God and with men, and he did not quit. Jacob obtains a new identity. It's a new life in Christ. When we speak to Christ, when we speak to God, He gives us a new identity when we surrender to His will for us. But we can't have that until we admit how we have been up until that moment. We must shift from our previous ways into what God wants us to be. You know, the blessing is a new life through Christ. That is what God promises us. So, for me personally, I know that growing up, I've always had an issue with lying. My parents can vouch for this, maybe. And when I was young, it was fine. It was just like funny lies or white lies, or it was just like common to just say whatever needed to be said to get out of the situation. As I grew up, it grew into like people pleasing and just lying to get out of conversations and stuff. And then I became so comfortable with it that as I grew older in college and after college, it was just like basically an inherent part of who I was. I would just lie and not feel anything about it. Whether it was just something that was negligible or serious things, it was what I did. And it wasn't until I actually got to face the repercussions of that, of my actions. I lost a very close friend of mine after college, one of my best friends. And so that was done because I promised him I would do something, and I just said I would, and I was like, whatever. And I knew I wasn't going to do it. And ultimately, the ripple effects is it cost me that friendship, and we're no longer friends. And that caused me to look at how lying was affecting not just my relationships, but every other aspect of my life. And so when I prayed about it, and it was really affecting me, and I told God, like, I'm a liar, and I don't want to be anymore, I want to change my ways, I shifted. And through the grace of God, I have found the ways to change my whole lifetime of learning how to act. And I don't lie anymore. That was a lie, actually. But I really am conscious about my lying. So I've changed, and it's interesting to be able to confidently say that, I will say, through God's grace. And because of that, and on the years I've been that way now, I'm able to see the effects of how God has blessed me, and I see how I've been able to just renew my friendships and have stronger bonds and even affect my work. And no matter even if there's repercussions, I'll be honest, and in the end it ends up being a greater blessing because of it. And now with all that, I've been able to even form the foundation of my relationships, and even with my now fiance, Maima, we have a very open, clear, and honest relationship, and it's the most beautiful thing. But it could not have happened with Shawn the liar. I received a new identity through Christ by admitting who I was before and surrendering to God's will for me. So the last thing that I just want to leave you with this story is, we see Jacob get a new identity, a new identity and a new life. And at the end, we see him leave this encounter with a limp. He limps away, and he has a permanent limp now the rest of his life. Right? And so, God purposefully leaves this limp. A lot of people ask, why didn't God just heal his limp? He's given him a new identity. Start fresh. But God purposefully left this limp because this was to be a reminder to Jacob of his actions, his experience. It is to become, when Jacob is limping, it is to be called a pivotal part of his testimony for God. It is evidence of God's grace in Jacob's life. And he's able to use it as a part of his testimony. So we all have our own limps and our own experiences in life, and we get to use them for God's glory. I pray that what others call your biggest failures in life, whatever your biggest scars are, I pray that we get to use them as our biggest examples of God's grace in our lives. God can deal with anyone, no matter how flawed they are, so long as they passionately pursue his presence. So this year, we must plan to win this year, but prepare to lose. And we must check our ambitions that they are for God and for God's glory, not our own. And it's with such actions that we may limp in faith, wear our scars proudly, and use them as a part of our testimony for God's grace, for God's glory. So I ask, what are your ambitions? What are your resolutions this year as you start not only 2020, and not only this decade for that matter, for the rest of your life? Are your ambitions that you set out for yourself, are they for you, or are they for God's will? Check your ambitions. Check how you're living your life. How will you react when you lose? It's easy to want to quit and give up, but we have the tools, and we have a new identity through Christ that allows us to progress in life. We've all lost. We've all had experiences like Jacob in our lives, and we all have the opportunity to receive a new identity through Jesus. So, my prayer for all of us, my prayer for you as we go into 2020 and the rest of the decade is not that we run into it in flesh and accomplish all the goals, all the ambitions that we have for ourselves, but rather I pray that we enter this new year limping in faith for His glory. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you.
We can have, if you have any questions. Just kidding. Can we give God a big round of applause, first of all? If 10 years ago, if you had asked me this, or 5 years ago, first of all, I didn't even know what I would do, but let alone know what my son can do, or what God can do in his life. So I am really, really, really thankful to God that what I saw too. I'm thankful to life. I'm thankful to God for time. Sometimes God takes us through the journey of life. I was telling somebody today in the morning church, it wasn't a counseling session, but somebody was questioning and talking about why life is difficult. I was able to tell them that this too shall pass. Things will happen that we cannot handle. Things will happen that leave us with a limp or a scar or a hurt. Okay? But remember,